Hi, my name is Olivia. I'm 14. Were you ever ashamed of your parents? Did they embarrass you at school or make you look stupid in front of your friends? I had to endure a lot of ridicule and mockery. Watch the video to the end and you will learn how sometimes children can be cruel. I never knew my real parents. They left me in an orphanage when I was a baby. I lived in it for 14 years and I can't say that it was a bad time. There were good guys and employees. I was quite comfortable. But still, I always waited to be taken to a family where I would have a mom and dad. But this did not happen for a long time. It was only when I turned 14 that a teacher came up to me and told me that there was a married couple who wanted to take me away. They were good and kind people. I was so happy and immediately agreed to meet with them. But the teacher warned me that I might not immediately get used to them because of their peculiarity. They were dwarves. At that moment, I didn't care about it and I agreed to the meeting. I pictured myself with new parents and was glowing with happiness. When I saw them for the first time on Skype, they were so sweet and were so happy to see me. Have you ever had your dreams come true? Soon the day came when my new parents came for me. I was very excited. You bet! After all, from this day on, a completely new life began. I had no idea what it was like to live in a family, but everything was about to change. I was waiting for them in the hall, surrounded by all my friends. We said goodbye and promised to each other that we would stay in touch. My parents came in, and I saw two very short people. Yes, I knew that there was such a disease, dwarvism, and of course I saw them in photos and met on Skype. I was sure that I was free from prejudice, but suddenly I felt very awkward. I noticed the kids' sideways glances and I could hear them giggling. My parents came up to me and said that they were happy to see me. I was very confused and could not answer. When we went out with them, I turned around and saw that one of the children could not help laughing and the teacher shushed him. We came to my new home. My parents showed me everything, and I really liked it there. It was a very cozy, warm house with a beautiful, simple decor and a pleasant atmosphere. I had my own room, and there was a big lawn around the house, and there was even a little dog. My parents were very friendly to me, but I couldn't look at them without paying attention to their peculiarity. I was afraid they felt it. All these thoughts made my heart very heavy, and when we had dinner, I could not eat a morsel. My parents tried to communicate with me, but I answered in monosyllables, and soon I got up from the table and went to bed. I couldn't bear the tension any longer. The next day after school, I went to the orphanage, to the children, hoping to get support. But when I arrived, I immediately heard giggles and felt angry glances at me. I tried to ignore them and just talk to them. However, they did not go to talk. Instead, they started insulting me and my parents, saying that they were ashamed to communicate with me. I was very surprised and upset. Were these the people I had been friends with for so many years? I burst into tears of resentment and told them that I thought we were friends. But they asked me to leave. I refused, and then one of them came up to me and pushed me in the shoulder. Others joined in and they started shoving me and laughing, and then I ran away from them. I began to curse myself for agreeing to leave with these parents, despite the fact that I liked them even in our first meeting. I really didn't want to go home. I went straight to my room. My parents tried to talk to me, but I asked them to leave me alone. I just lay there and tried to deal with what happened today. I realized that this situation did not suit me. I was not ready to lose friends to strangers, even if they were technically my parents. I decided to go back to the shelter. My escape was unlikely to succeed, so I had another plan. I began to make sure that my parents themselves returned me there. I started skipping classes at school, and when I came, I failed and was rude to the teachers. Soon, my parents started receiving complaints from the school about my behavior. But they were very patient. Even when I made a mess in the house or even broke something as if by accident, my parents were understanding and calmly asked me to be careful. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get them mad. At one point, I could hear them discussing that I just needed to get used to my new home. That's when I realized my plan wasn't going to work. They were too kind to me. It should have been nice, but it only made me angrier. Moreover, the children from the orphanage who went to school with me had already spread a rumor about my family. And now, even at school, I couldn't walk a step without being mocked. Have you ever been bullied? Then you know how I felt. Then, I had a new plan. Now, of course, I am ashamed of what I did. I remembered that I saw a social program on TV about how employees took children from an unfavorable family. I decided to do the same. I anonymously called the helpline and told them that I saw parents beating and humiliating a child near a supermarket that stood near my house. I specifically spoke in a tearful voice so that they would believe me. They asked me for the address and promised to come and investigate. I didn't think I was doing the right thing, but I was looking forward to going back to the orphanage soon and not being humiliated. Employees of the Child Protection Service arrived the next day. My parents were very surprised to see them. The employees told them that they had received a complaint about child abuse. My parents just threw up their hands and swore that nothing had happened. For a while, the employees looked around the house, asked my parents questions about their lives, and wrote something down in their notebooks. I began to worry that they might see through my lies. What would I get for it? Then they came up to me. They took me to another room and asked me if I had called them on the phone. I was very worried. I forgot everything I said at the time and was talking some nonsense, and they listened carefully and wrote it down. Then, without a word, they went into the living room where my parents were standing. I saw that my mother was crying and I felt uneasy. The employees reported that they were required to conduct a detailed investigation and open a case. If they realized that I was in danger, I might be removed from the family. I didn't expect this. I thought I was just going to be taken away, and I didn't want to ruin my foster parents' lives. The employees told me to pack, but I just froze. On the one hand, my plan worked, but on the other, was it worth it? Seeing my hesitation, the employees said that if I had something to say, it was better to do it now. I looked at my parents and realized I couldn't do this. I burst into tears of shame and confessed that I had lied. I begged not to punish me for making a false complaint, and the employees chuckled and said that more checks would be needed. My parents went outside to see off the uninvited guests. I followed them. They looked at me with surprise and resentment. My father asked me to explain what had happened. As I continued to cry, I told them how I was being bullied by my friends at the orphanage and classmates at school because my parents were dwarves. My father told me that they did not want to be a burden to me and spoil my life. They only wanted to accept me into their family. I could leave at any time. They didn't hold me. But then he said that before I did, I had to ask myself what was more important to me. The opportunity of a loving family, or friends who were ready to laugh at me at the first opportunity. Of course, I knew what he meant. Friends who behaved like this were not friends at all, but a family like this. This was what I had dreamed of all my life. How can you deprive yourself of the dreams due to the fact that someone out there laughs at you? I was so ashamed that I had caused so much trouble to my parents. I asked for forgiveness. And I hope they don't hold grudges and I can correct my first impression of myself. It wasn't long before I felt like a part of their family, and now I'm very happy that I still stayed with them. If you like my story, then like it and subscribe to the channel. I hope you have real friends, not those who are ready to turn away from you at any moment.
Hello everyone, I'm Roxy, 13 years old. Who would you call your parents? The ones who gave birth to you? Those who raised you? The people you live with? Sometimes they are the same people. In my case, oh, far from it. My family history is much more complicated. Watch this video to the end and find out why I was adopted with my parents still alive. I had 2 dads. How many things I've heard about it. Everyone cared if I liked boys, and no one cared that my dads were the best people in the world. I loved Hal and Bernard, and they took good care of me, took care of my development, and entertained me. Sometimes we received letters from Tina. This is my surrogate mother. She didn't come to see me, but she was still interested in how I lived there, whether I was well fed. Well, I can say that it was pretty good. Very good. Our city is small, and there are not many people like my dad's. And they don't like them. Hal worked from home. It was easier for him. Bernard had to go to the office, but he was the best employee there, and they didn't fire him. It's just that the city we live in is very conservative. It is located in the Midwest, and traditional families are honored here, so that the work is from call to call and not creative. So no one was friends with us, but it could have been worse. Would you avoid your family if it caused you problems with your peers? I thought about it a lot when I was younger. If I was told to protect my dads or get a more normal life, what would I choose? Now I can answer this question with confidence. One day, no, I can't talk about it calmly. I was sitting and doing my homework, and then somebody started knocking on the door. So gently, quietly. I went out. There were some people and the police. I immediately said that my parents were not at home, and they said, "Baby, we know." And they said I should go to the station. What was the matter? I was not going anywhere without them. And then I heard the most terrible words in my life. Your parents were in an accident. I didn't think much after that. Call my family? But I had no other relatives. Hal and Bernard's parents disowned them when they started living together. I didn't even know their phone numbers. Did they even live in this city? I sat and cried in a corner, thinking that now no one would check my lessons, and then I pinched myself painfully for not grieving as I should. I then began to cry out loud when I was told that someone had come to take care of me in this situation. I clung to the chair and they couldn't get me out of it. I roared and screamed that I wasn't going anywhere, that I wasn't going to any relatives, that Hal and Bernard were still alive. I was told that I couldn't live alone anyway. I was met by a friendly man who turned out to be a cousin of Bernard and was engaged in farming, so he lived in the country. But he was talkative and persuaded me. His name was Will, said that it would be good for me to recover now, away from the places where Hal and Bernard were injured. Well, he was probably right. At least I believed him. He lived in a remote area that was almost a 3-hour drive away. He had his own farm, a house, and 8 children. Seriously, I hadn't seen as many kids in children's cartoons as this guy had. His wife was quiet and expressionless, and she didn't even kiss me when I arrived. Maybe because if she kissed me, she would stop setting up the Cuisinart. I was well fed, but I was confused that their house was so quiet and strange, or what. I asked if I could watch TV, but Will told me sternly that they didn't have a TV. I almost dropped my fork. What else did they do here? Could I read something? Good idea, but you have to get up early tomorrow. Yes, that's right. If I wanted to get to school, I would have to get up 2 hours earlier. So cool. I was put up with the other girls and they were already going to bed even though it was only 8 o'clock. They didn't talk to me and I was very shy. Maybe I was not needed here at all. I couldn't sleep and I went to the kitchen for a drink of water. But Will was in the kitchen talking to a police officer. They didn't notice me. I hid around the corner and what I heard about my parents. What would you do if someone scolded your parents in front of you? Would you start fighting? Would you argue with them? Would you ignore it? I was used to ignoring nasty things, but now it was a completely different situation. Will said they led a depraved life. Oh yes, a depraved life. A barbecue party and pizza for the holiday. Said they were turning me into a boy. Yes, my hair was shorter than that of his clumpy daughters. He said that they were drug addicts and that's why they got into an accident. At this point, my patience broke. I screamed that it wasn't true. Will screamed that I should be in bed. The officer tried to calm the poor child, but I had enough time to hear from him that the accident was for the best, that I would be better off without my dads. I tried to run away from this house several times. I was ruining my clothes, I broke their equipment on the field, I hid in the cowshed so I wouldn't have to sit at the same table with these degenerates. They wanted to make me grow my hair, but I cut it off, and then I got it in the neck and the tirade for an hour and a half. That I was just as unbearable as my parents. It was just awful. Very soon, a small shabby car drove up to the house. And out of it came a tiny woman in a modest headscarf and an ugly dress. She apologized 1,000 times, said her name was Tina, and she was my mother? Wait, what? This little thing in the headscarf? Will was interested in what she would say to him, and Tina told him that she had a difficult life situation and she had to give birth to a baby for these people. And she so would like to have her own. So this chick wrote me letters? Really? Will was glad to see her, and she said that she was pleased about her conscience and that he hoped for a happy and healthy future for his niece. In your dreams. I was not going anywhere with her. I clung to my chair and started yelling things about that woman and Will and everyone else, but Will slapped me in the face and dragged me to the car of this saint. And my mother only thanked him for saving me. I gave my word to run away as soon as we stopped somewhere. But as soon as we left the house, Saint Tina swore dirty, took off the headscarf, and my brain just burned out at that moment. She was bald and with tattoos. What? Hi, daughter, Tina said to me. I was speechless and she kept talking. It turned out that she was an anarchist activist and she met my dads when they were all young and wild. And she was happy to help them with the baby. Her lifestyle wasn't exactly conducive for parenting, but she was always interested in my life. And when she couldn't reach my dad's again, she came to town to sort it out in person. And that's how it got to me. I screamed with joy and hugged her tight. Tina drove me home, gave me pizza, and told me not to worry about anything. Will wouldn't bother me anymore. Hal came out of the coma a couple of days later, and a week later, I was allowed to visit him. Bernard was also on the mend, but he wasn't feeling well yet, so Hal suggested that Tina and I move to a bigger city. But they would need help. Hal patted me and told me they'd get to us anyway, but they couldn't keep an eye on me yet. And when they could walk, they would definitely move in with us, take me back, and we would live as before. And I didn't mind. I still miss Hal and Bernard very much, but I'm glad my mom is a great woman and not at all willing to take me away from my beloved parents. I would like to grow up like her. Maybe Will was right and my gay parents really messed me up. But I would never trade the freedom they gave me for the false bondage that reigned in the home of my so-called foster family, where there was neither love nor kindness. Subscribe to our channel, put likes, and send your interesting life stories. Hi, my name is Christy. Have you ever had a lot of money in your hands? Maybe you received a large inheritance or a gift from rich relatives? This happened to me. I became rich at 15 years old. Watch this video to the end and you will learn what difficulties come with wealth and how to deal with them. It so happened that I never knew my parents. Since I was a baby, I was raised in an orphanage. I was lucky. We had very kind teachers and good kids. We were all one close-knit family. When someone was picked up, which was very rare, we all got very bored and, if possible, continued to communicate. I lived in this place for 15 years, and I didn't even think about the possibility that someone might adopt me. But one day, a rich married couple came to us. They could not have children and wanted to take a child from the orphanage. Moreover, they wanted to take an older child to avoid the worries associated with young children. So their choice fell on me. I met with them, and it seemed to me that they were good people. And besides, they were also very rich, which meant that I would live in comfort. A couple of weeks later, I moved into their house. It was a huge 3-story cottage in the center of our city. I got my own huge room, a computer, a game console, and delicious food. I was also given large amounts of pocket money. I was so thrilled. Have you ever had a situation where you suddenly got everything you wanted? However, as time went on, I began to realize that things were not as smooth as I thought. At some point, they started talking to me in an irritated and cold way. If I did something wrong, they would start swearing at me, accusing me of being careless. At first, I thought it would pass with time, but the number of claims only increased. I was tired of putting up with it, so I decided to ask what it was all about. At dinner that night, I told them that I had noticed how often they were angry with me, and I wanted to find out what was wrong. They started saying that everything was fine, but I was not satisfied with this answer. I told them it would be better for everyone if we discussed it. But they were only more angry at my words. After another question, my father flared up and launched into a tirade about how bad I was behaving. My mother supported his every word. After another argument, they took away my pocket money and sent me to my room. I pretended to obey, and then I slipped out of the house to meet my friend from the orphanage named Robin. We agreed that we would meet in the city park. When we met, he said that he had bad news. The orphanage was running out of money. The city's funding was not enough, and if this went on, the orphanage would be closed. I asked what would happen to the kids. Robin replied that they would be distributed to other orphanages in the nearest cities. This was terrible. All the kids were so attached to each other, it would hurt them very much if they were separated. In addition, it was not known whether house mothers in other orphanages were as kind as we had. I promised Robin that I would try to help the orphanage in any way I could. The next day, I went to my foster father and told him about the orphanage situation. I hoped that he, being rich enough, would help the orphanage where I grew up. My father understood me completely wrong. He started accusing me of getting money out of him and that I didn't understand how hard it was for him to get it. As a result, he forbade me to see the children from the orphanage, saying that this would prevent me from becoming a full member of society. I was upset, but I didn't give up. I started thinking about how else I could help the orphanage. I decided to go to work, but there was a problem. All the ads that I watched were looking for people not under the age of 16. Finally, I came across an ad for a leaflet distributor that didn't specify the minimum age. I called them, and they took me right away. I started going to work every day after school. They didn't pay much, but I had to do something. What would you be willing to work 6 hours after each school day for? One day, I saw two men. I recognized them as friends of my foster parents. They just waved and walked past me, and I didn't even care. However, a couple of days later, my mother was not home, and my foster father called me over. He was tense and stern. His friends told him that I was handing out leaflets, and he didn't like it very much. He said that I should not waste time on such nonsense and study economics and business theory instead, so that in the future I could take over his business. He didn't even ask me what I wanted to do. He had already decided everything for me. I got mad at him and told him what I thought. I told him that he was doing nothing to me and had no right to tell me what to do. It made him mad. He started shouting at me, accusing me of being ungrateful and saying that I had to listen to him because I was his daughter. I wasn't going to bend, so I answered him. I called him a greedy, violent lunatic who would never be my father. At that moment, I got a slap in the face. My father, who had slapped me, stood panting, his face red with anger. I was in so much pain, not physically, but mentally, that I started to cry. He also demanded that I didn't tell anyone about it, threatening to ruin my life if I did. He said that with his connections, he could easily put me in jail or deprive me of the opportunity to get a normal job. He left, and I went back to my room, crying and trembling with fear. I realized I couldn't stay here any longer. I packed my things at night. But before I left, I had an idea. I thought that my foster father was really a scoundrel, and it would be all right if I took some money from him to take it to the orphanage. I crept into my parents' bedroom and, very quietly, so as to not wake anyone, found his wallet in his bag. Soon I reached the orphanage. I went to the house mother and told her everything that happened. She was shocked and very worried about me. She allowed me to stay at the orphanage despite the fact that she could have problems. I thanked her and gave her the money I had taken from my father. I lied about earning it though. I went to bed, and in the morning I woke up to some screams outside the door. I looked out and saw my father and several police officers, and the house mother was standing in front of them. My father noticed me and pulled me out of the room. He said I would go with him, but I resisted. I broke free and ran away from him to the house mother. The father began to threaten that he would charge the house mother with child abduction, and the police would be on his side. I was terrified. I couldn't figure out if my foster mom knew what he was doing. But I didn't want the house mother to have any problems, so I agreed to go with my father. However, I had a plan. My father was silent all the way home, but I knew I was going to get a lot of trouble at home. He probably noticed the money was missing, and I didn't think he was going to let me get away with it. There was only one thing I needed to do. When we got home, I jumped out of the car and ran quickly to my room. I heard my father following me. I quickly took out my phone, turned on the camera, and put it in an inconspicuous place. Then my father came into the room. Without saying a word, he hit me in the face and then started screaming. I had never been so humiliated. He called me a thief and a bastard. Then he hit me a few more times and left. I was hurt, but I was glad. There was evidence on my phone that he was hitting me. I didn't care about his threats. I was going to sit back. I went to the police and showed them the tape. No amount of connections helped the father avoid being punished for child abuse. He and my mother were deprived of custody of me and forced to pay me monetary compensation. At the trial, I felt sorry for my mother. She didn't seem to know that my father was hitting me, and she was sad that everything had turned out this way. Before this situation, I thought that if I had a lot of money, I would be happier. But now I realize that even with a lot of money, you can be unhappy and angry. I was happy to return to the orphanage, and the compensation my father paid was enough to fix the situation with its budget. Once in the orphanage, I began to appreciate the place even more and began to actively help with the housework and care for babies. Also, working as a promoter, I realized that it was time to think about my future profession, and I decided to devote myself to social work in order to give joy to those who found themselves in a difficult situation like me. If you like the story, subscribe to the channel and put a like, and click the bell icon. This way, you can be the first to watch new stories. All the best to you. Don't let the wealth pass you by.
We crept into my room by the fire escape so that we wouldn't be seen. Chuck was about to kiss me when suddenly, gosh, the footsteps. These are them. I told Chuck to hide, but he hesitated. My parents will kill you if they find you here with me. I blurted out and shoved Chuck into the closet. And a second later, my parents came in. Did they really hear us? I was afraid. My parents stood in the doorway and said nothing. My dad sat down next to me, took off his glasses, and finally said, "We've decided to adopt a child." What the? Are they crazy? I was totally against coddling a baby, but I didn't say anything out loud because I had to get them out of the room because Chuck was still in my closet. Well, yeah. Sure, since you've decided. I don't mind, I said quickly, trying to drown out the noise from the closet. Now can I, change my clothes? My parents were surprised at the urgency, and my father went out to the closet and suspiciously looked at it, and they left the room. We almost got burned, I said and let Chuck out. This should be celebrated. He winked, pulling a bottle from his pocket. Wow, at that moment, my father came back. He had forgotten his glasses. There was a scandal. Get out, you brat! Dad yelled, dragging Chuck out of the room by the scruff of the neck. I ran after them into the hallway, begging my dad not to touch my boyfriend. But my father wouldn't let up. No more going outs. You got it? Then Chuck broke free, smashed the window with something, and jumped out into the street. What a crazy guy he is. That's why I fell in love with him. My mother was calming my father down and said that I didn't think of his weak heart. They made me go back to my room and my father locked the door. In tears, I called Chuck. He was already hanging out at some party. I apologized for my father and cried that I was now under house arrest. And soon, there will be another child here, and my life will become unbearable. I want freedom. I want to be with you. I asked Chuck to help me escape, but he said it was a bad idea. My parents would turn the whole city upside down to find me. It's lousy when you have no family. Chuck continued, I'd like to be adopted. What do you mean? I was taken aback. And then Chuck said that he was from the orphan home. Gosh, I didn't know that. He's lucky. Nobody controls him. Wait, what if my parents adopt him? Then he will be able to hang out in my room and it won't arouse suspicion. Chuck was worried that my father would recognize him and get in trouble. We decided that we would change his haircut, wash up the emo coloring, and get dressed neatly. My parents would love him. The day of the trip to the orphan home came. I asked my parents to go there with them and found out which boy they chose. Everything went according to plan. I'd met with Chuck at the orphanage, and we'd gotten rid of the kid for a while. Chuck had promised to take him to a biker race if my parents didn't see him. Chuck was unrecognizable. He played a whole performance in front of my parents. He told them how he likes to fix cars and is fond of homemade pastries. He even baked cookies himself. My mother was delighted with him, but my father was still doubtful. In addition, they were worried about the 10-year-old boy they had previously seen. After all, they were thinking about him for so long. We went to look for him in the yard, and then my father was attacked by a dog. Chuck instantly reacted and drove it away. Wow. I hinted to my dad that a 16-year-old boy is much better option, and there's less fuss with him and much more help. In the end, my parents agreed, and a week later, Chuck could leave with us. When we got home, Chuck moved into the room next to mine. Now we will be together all the time. The first day, I was waiting for him after school, but he didn't come. As it turned out, my parents had already enrolled him in the sports section. Wow. And the next night, he was busy doing his homework. I was looking forward to the weekend, but Chuck spent it helping my parents around the house. I couldn't believe my eyes. Where was that freaky rebel I fell in love with? He even studied better than I did. Chuck made excuses saying he was interested in a lot of things and it was difficult to do everything in time. Then I asked my father to reduce his load, but he ignored me. In the end, Mom and Dad spent days talking to Chuck. Parents seem to have forgotten that they have their own daughter. They didn't even care how I dressed or what time I got home. And Chuck continued to behave like an obedient son. We didn't go out together at all. I was hoping things would get better after the night of the rock concert. The concert was announced a month ago, and the teenagers weren't allowed in. But Chuck promised to arrange it. We agreed to meet at the entrance, but I ended up freaking outside for hours, and he never came. When I got home, Chuck said that he and my father had an urgent business in the garage. He seems to have gotten used to the good boy role and forgotten that he's here for me. I have to show him how easily he can lose my parents' favor. While he was in class, I made a mess of his room, and then I put cigarettes pack in his jacket. I spent a whole evening waiting for it to be found. A day later, I broke Dad's screwdriver in the garage and left Chuck's cap on it. I was hoping that after this, my parents would cool off and Chuck would think more of me. But in the end, even my father reacted calmly to all that, saying that the guy needs time to adapt. But Chuck was really mad at me. Why are you setting me up? He asked me once. What else should I do? I said he was my boyfriend, not my boring parents' perfect son. But Chuck said I had a great family and I was just being selfish. Oh, really? Then I'm gonna tell them that you're actually a ragamuffin who used them. I shouted and ran to the door. Chuck turned pale and grabbing my hand said, "You wouldn't dare." We'll see. I broke away and ran into the living room to my parents. I blurted it out to them right away. Chuck was only pretending to be a good boy, and that he was the boy my parents saw in the closet that day. My father was enraged instantly. He yelled that I had shamelessly deceived them, and then Dad suddenly froze. He swayed, croaked something, and started to fall, holding his heart. Oh my God! From shock, my mother and I did not know what to do, and only Chuck didn't lose his head. He yelled Mom to call 911, ran up to Dad, and started doing heart massage. What if Dad doesn't help? And Dad, I won't forgive myself for this. When the doctors arrived, my father's condition was really bad. He was taken to the hospital. My mother and I accompanied him and waited in the waiting room all evening. It was just painful. Finally, the doctor came out and said that Dad was in a coma, but without first aid, he wouldn't have survived at all. All thanks to Chuck. We were forbidden to stay the night there, so we came home. But we couldn't find Chuck and all his belongings were gone from his room. I understood that Chuck ran away. Everything collapsed in an instant. I felt terrible. I'm the reason my dad's in the hospital. Why did I turn in Chuck? My parents were so attached to him. They were happy when he lived with us. And now we need to find Chuck and apologize. Mom suggested we go to the orphan home together. What if he went back there? The next day, she baked Chuck a pie and went there. But the caretaker said Chuck never came back. We were very upset and were about to leave when suddenly I heard the orphans' conversation. All their squad was going to the nightclub this night. Chuck's probably there. We went to that nightclub and struggled through the crowd. Looking around, here he is. Chuck tried to run away again, but I stopped him and forced myself to say, "It was hard for me to accept how much you've changed. I don't know what's between us right now, but my family needs you." Chuck hesitated, but then Mom came over and handed him a piece of pie. "You must be hungry." Then Chuck looked confused and stared at the floor. He didn't know what to say. His freaky parents, standing around, stared at us in disbelief. Finally, Chuck looked up, smiled and said, "Your home is the best food in the world." We laughed and hugged. Seems like he really has become a part of our family. We left the nightclub and then we got a call from the hospital. They said my father has emerged from coma. We rushed there and ran into his room. Thank God, Dad is fine. Mom and I rushed to hug him, and only Chuck was left standing awkwardly in the corner. Then Dad noticed him and called him over. "Thank you," he softly said to Chuck and tightly hugged him. We all returned home together. I thought my father would hate me after my scam, but we ended up being more careful of each other. I apologized and stopped arguing with him, and Dad realized that he was strict with me. Chuck got along well with Dad and actually even shared his interests. Parents no longer worried that their foster son was a freak. They thought Chuck was a good person and didn't mind us dating. The only thing we still have to decide is, who are we to each other?
Hi, my name is Emily, and I'm 16 years old. Do you know what a life of lies is? Did somebody hide from you the truth for many years that you had a right to know? I experienced it myself, and it was disgusting. Watch to the end and find out what it's like to deal with the terrible consequences of something that has been hidden from you for a long time. Many people thought I was very lucky. I have a very caring mother, and my father is a big shot in our city. I was specifically pampered. My parents were literally turned on me, and all the whims were fulfilled almost at the click. But as I grew up, I began to feel as if my parents were trying to placate me. They avoided looking me in the eye, smiled shyly, whispered and stopped talking when I approached. It was strange, wasn't it? When I started middle school, Dr. Hoffman came to see me once a month, and we had a heartfelt conversation, and he prescribed me some kind of pills for good health. My mother told me they were vitamins, but I doubted it. Did you ever get the feeling that your parents were lying to you? This was not very pleasant. As soon as I raised this question, everyone left the subject. Mom and Dad locked themselves in their bedroom with a doctor and talked to him for an hour, sometimes 2. It's a shame, don't you agree? I decided to act on my own. One evening, when Doc and I finished our conversation, I decided to end all this endless silence. I crawled into my parents' bedroom and hid under their bed. I listened to their conversation and couldn't breathe. I was in such a deep shock. They were talking about how crazy I was, that my condition was bothering them, that I should be admitted to the hospital. Yes, it was about a psychiatric hospital where my own parents wanted to take me. The doctor talked to me and brought me pills to treat not my body, but my soul and head. And there was something that still bothered me. Mom and Dad were always arguing about whether it was my father's or my mother's fault, as if it wasn't about them. I suspected something, but how could I get to the truth? I had to play detective. I couldn't just ask my parents. They had already lied to me, so why expect them to tell the truth? But I had a favorite grandma who lived in a nursing home, so I visited her. During tea, I mentioned casually that my mother said she had been in a psychiatric hospital. My grandma frowned and said I was probably referring to my other mother, but quickly covered up the slip. I asked her again, but she said I'd heard something wrong. Outwardly, I was calm, but inside, I was in complete shock. And the secret I had discovered was not quite clear to me. I was in foster care, and my mother was in some kind of clinic. The thought made me angry. If my foster parents were liars, I would have to find her myself. There were several hospitals in our city, and I was trying to figure out which one I should go to. And I also stopped drinking my vitamins, secretly from my parents, of course. I called hospitals and made up a story about looking for a distant relative who I only knew had a daughter the year I was born. Even if they listened to me, they couldn't help me. I decided to break in and go through my father's personal papers. And I found an adoption document signed by the head doctor of the psychiatric hospital. No wonder the search turned up nothing. This facility was located in a neighboring city, and I really had to run away from my home to get there and demand answers to all my questions. At the hospital, I told the story of a distant relative again, but they didn't listen to me. So I hung around and snuck in with a couple. Then I wandered the halls for a long time. And I found an unlocked office with a lot of cabinets. Apparently, they kept patient records here. But while I was thinking about which box to start with, the nurse came back and raised the alarm. I tried to escape and ran into a security guard. He started threatening the police, and I shouted my last name and threatened problems with my father, then burst into tears and added that I just wanted to see my mother. The guard and the nurse were confused and decided to send me to the head doctor. How would you feel if you were on the verge of the biggest secret in your life? My heart was pounding so hard I couldn't breathe. The head doctor was a nice old woman. She offered to have a cup of coffee in her office. This time I didn't lie. and immediately told her about my foster parents and the search for the real ones, and begged her not to call the police and just tell me everything as it was. Then I would leave. The doctor said she couldn't tell me about my parents without permission of my guardians. Instead, she offered to listen to a story about a girl who had nothing to do with me. This girl's father was a rapist, a cruel and terrible man. He abused the girl's mother and abandoned her, and she hated him so much that she couldn't accept her daughter. She suffered terribly for a year and decided to give the baby up for adoption. To find out that I was born just because my mother was horribly abused, that was hard. A lump formed in my throat, and it was a miracle I didn't cry. I wanted to see her, but I was told that she died in this hospital just a year ago. The trauma broke her life and was with her until her death. So I inherited her fear? The doctor shook her head. My mother's disorder was related to her trauma. My illness was a gift from my maniac father. I don't know if this truth broke me, but my behavior has changed. I closed myself off from my parents. It was so hard for me to talk to them, sit at dinner, even cross eyes. Of course they felt it, felt that something unpleasant was weighing me down. And they were damn right. I was frozen with fear, thinking that I was about to turn into a maniac like my real father. I was so scared that one day I couldn't stand it, and I picked up a razor. Fortunately, my parents caught me just as I was making my first incision. I was crying, my mother was crying, and my father was screaming. He just went crazy, telling me how ungrateful I was and how much they had done for me. I started screaming too. I don't remember what it was, but the phrase, "You are not my parents," was repeated several times. God, how embarrassing. Do you know how it all ended? They decided to send me to a psychiatric hospital. A children's hospital, but still a psychiatric hospital, so I wouldn't hurt them or myself. They decided to get rid of me. It was like I was suffocating, on the verge of fainting, or even actually dying. I imagined myself dying here, like my real mother died in that hospital, and I decided to escape from this asylum. And I almost did it. The first night, I opened the window, but at the last moment, I was afraid to jump. I couldn't jump. Yes, I hated myself and the world, and all the more, where should I run? While I was making up my mind, I heard footsteps behind me. Too late. I was caught. Fortunately, it was not a doctor, but another patient my age. He asked me why I decided to run away, and I told him everything that had happened. And he was telling me that my parents didn't get rid of me, that they wanted to help me. And all the anger and suspicion were in me because I had stopped taking the pills a couple of weeks before. But what about my terrible inheritance? The guy suggested that my father, even though he was ill, committed crimes because he was bullied as a child. He took revenge on people for childish insults. And I suddenly remembered very well how much my mother and father did for me, how happy my childhood was. I had nothing to avenge, so there was no danger? I stopped thinking about myself and thought about my parents, about their feelings, and I definitely didn't want to run away. That night, I called my mother and confessed everything. This was such a weight off my mind. I can't tell you how grateful I am to them all. My parents, the head doctor, and that guy. After all the excitement had subsided, I began to miss my mom and dad desperately. It was no longer a secret between us, and I was looking forward to seeing them again. And as a good, exemplary patient, I took pills, went for walks, to therapy. I told my roommates my amazing story, but it quickly turned out that mine wasn't the weirdest yet. After my return, my mother and I had a long, private conversation about my illness. The acute condition has passed, but I will have to carefully monitor my health. When I was lying under the bed, it seemed to me that Mom and Dad were plotting something bad against me. The truth was much simpler. If you want more stories just as interesting and useful, I hope, subscribe to our channel. Click on the bell and find out everything first, and let there be no dark secrets in your life.